Good evening. I'm going to talk about my experiences of to actually growing up and working in a railway town. I split it into different sections, and the first section is railway influences in my childhood. The railway did influence my life before I really realised it. We lived at 136 Morrison Street in Robbourne, next door but one to Martin's the Butcher's, right on the junction of Morrison Street. Because of its historic background and the fact that the hooter was probably the first thing I took any notice of when I was young, I'll just make a few comments about that. This one abiding memory I have of living in Robbourne is to hearing the sound of this hooter, morning, noon and night, day in, day out, year in, year out. It could really be seen as the beating heart of Swindon. Always on day, always on time, never late, and it was always there. It was always there in my life. And I did ask Dad, what's that noise? And he said, well, that's a factory hooter. But at that time, I didn't know really what a factory was. I had no idea what a hooter was. But in time, I found out. So it's a strident call reached out far beyond Swindon. I've been told it has been heard at Marlborough. The two valves can still be seen on top of the outlet building. Unfortunately, of course, they don't sound now, but occasionally you do hear recording of it in the Steam Museum. But it's very much less, of course, than what it used to be. Robbourne Road and men on bicycles. I think I forgot to say, I was born in 1946 with my twin brother Derek. And when we, on school holidays, we went down often to Robbourne Road to actually watch the men come out of the factory, because we were so fascinated seeing so many crowds of men on bicycles. Some were walking, and the occasional person trying to go the other way. It was very difficult, they just couldn't get through. Fountain Road Park. Mum often took us to Fountain Road Park. We used to ride our tricycles round the circular path. Mum sat on a seat somewhere doing some sewing or knitting. And when we met halfway, we used to say hello, just carry on. Bit daft really, because we were with each other all the time, but we just couldn't think of anything else to say. Oh yeah, and Mum took us on a trip to the railway works when they had the open day. I don't remember which shop it was. It may have been the art shop, the machine shop, because I know there was a lot of machine around, but I didn't really understand what it was. I looked up in the roof and there was a big red sign, danger, live wires. That really scared me for a while, but obviously it wasn't meant for people walking on the ground. It was meant for people that if they had to go near these wires, to be aware of them. At our school time years were in the 1960s, and the outer trip trains were still being run, and we used to go get a taxi down to Park Lane, just by the Robbie Bridges. There used to be an access ramp just by the on the side of the road for our track vehicles to get along to maintain the track. That's blocked off now, but on trip days we used to actually be able to go up this slope and walk along the track. It's something we would never been allowed to do before. We walked along the track because all the trains were all queued up, one after the other. The ones that had to go first were coming up the front. We were about halfway. Usually we went to Paynton. Most years we went to Paynton, And to get into the coach, you went up some wooden steps. Oh, so exciting, you know, much better than going to the station. We used to lay in bed on the Friday night because until we were about 12, we both had the one bed, and we used to hear these whistles of the trains when they were being shunted into the sidings, and we felt, you know, we listened to this all night. Of course, that we didn't, you know, we went to sleep, and Mum and Dad had to wake us up, but we didn't mind because we know we were going on a trip train. Trip trains always seem to bring that excitement to it. We didn't really go on the trains much, apart from trip, but that's one time we did. By this time, anybody could actually travel on the trip trains. Dad usually wrote off, just asked for 2 tickets, well, 2 adults and 2 children. Mum said one year, well, I'll do it, I'll save you a job, I'll do it. So she did. She had a very nice letter back. Dear Madam, if you would tell us where you would like to go, we will get you your tickets, which didn't please Dad very much. So from then on, that was back to his job. We were never really very interested in train spotting, but we did like going to the railway station. It smelled like a railway station. It was the steam, because at that time it was the old 1870s building that we knew as the station. And you used to go into the front entrance to the ticket office, turn right in, and to go down under the subway. And yeah, we liked the smell, you know, that we liked the smell of a station. It was quite exciting. Well, when we were out on Manhattan Wreck, we could see some 8 tall black chimneys. We thought they were probably in the railway work, because that was the direction where they seemed to be. And I found out later they were part of the central boiler station, but by the time I got into the works, they'd been replaced by much more efficient ones, and lot less interesting. At the end of the Robin Road, there was the gasworks. Now, I didn't know as a child that these also belonged to the railway. But, you know, virtually everybody in Robbourne could smell these gasworks. You know, it was a smell that you couldn't really get away from. They stuck up in the air for all to see, and the smell was actually, you know, it was quite strong. I did actually, later on, go into the gasworks regularly, which I shall talk about that in a little while. Do anybody remember the Monkey Club? It used to be, it used to be in between the Patton Stores and Redcliffe Street. I think it was probably a working men's club. Yeah, I didn't ever go in there because it always looked very, very drab, but it was quite nice inside probably, you know. But I can't speak from experience. The long shed at Wooden Bassett Road, Mum and Dad were quite happy for us to actually ride our bikes out around Swindon, and we used to go outside of the town really sometimes. We went along Wooden Bassett Road, and we could see this long shed by the side of the railway lines. We wondered what it was for. I found out since it was used as a store for some rolling stock, and also during the war it was used for some actual testing purpose, but I'm not really quite sure exactly what they were testing for. I think it was for some sort of a new weapon. I don't really know. Bruce Street Bridge used to be a little arch bridge. There was just one bridge there, one little arch bridge. there was a big circle in the front where buses coming down Robin Road, that was the double-decker buses. They couldn't go beyond the bridge because it was too low. So all the buses down to Cheney Manor, they had to be single buses. So in front of this bridge, there was a big circle where they could turn around and go back into town. When the bridge was replaced in 1957, my uncle Bill, he was the actual engineer in charge of the construction. He lived in Bath, but obviously he often came to Swindon when they were working on this bridge. And my nan lived in the same street as we did, just farther down the road. He often brought her a set of glasses or a set of tea towels, you know. She was always pleased to see him, not because of what he brought, but because it was nice to see him, you know. There was also one more small arch bridge. If you go across Mannington Wreck towards what was the Shore Road, you went through a gate from the wreck, through some allotments, then you had this little brick arch bridge, which actually carried the railway line up from Marlborough. Then there was more allotments on the other side, and that brought you to Shore Road. And very often we used to, on a Sunday evening pass, we used to walk across here and walk along to the Nine Elms. It was called the Nine Elms, but I think there was but one elm there by that time. And of course all that site now is all gone in the Great Western Way. Some of our relations used to come down to see us from Darwin once a year because they had to come during the school holidays. And they came on the train that came along this line and stopped up the station in Old Town. I think it was the Pines Express. And each year, you know, we went saw them for a few days and they went back again. That's most of what is actually I could think of in my actually childhood. When I was 15, I started working in the railways. I had an apprenticeship with fitting, turning and erecting, but I couldn't start that till I was 16. And it was the practice then for boys that had apprenticeships. The railways would actually find them a job during that 12 months before they could start their apprenticeship. And most of the boys went into shop offices where they really just paper pushing, because most of the offices only dealt with work in that particular shop. But I was in the e-shop, which was the other side of the Gloucester line, and E-shop, D-shop, platelers, and the X-shop. All those were in that area. The E-shop, they had a little egg station all around the locomotive works. Not the cars and wagon works, because I presume they had their own arrangements, but I was just involved in the locomotive works. And I had to go to most of these depots at least once a day, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, it varied, but most of them at least once a day. And I start there in December, about a week after my birthday. And after I was been there a couple of months, I asked the chief clerk named Ken Webb, can I get a permit from the bicycle so that I can use that to get round quicker? Which he thought was a great idea, because it meant I could get more work done. It just meant I could pay more visits, you know. And it was a very good time because I had time to explore the work, to find what went on in all these shops that I didn't really know about. So as long as I got the work done I was getting done and left nothing outstanding by the end of the day, they were quite happy for me to, you know, to go around the works. I didn't really say I spent a lot of time exploring because I got the work done I had to do, so I felt, you know, quite happy. think it's the time perhaps to bring in the subway from Emblem Square. At the moment, you go down the subway, and then it's blocked at one end, but there is the ramp just going up to the left, up towards the offices. But this time, that the subway went on down farther, there was a ramp farther on down, also went up to the road. But on the right, there was a subway that went under the Gloucester line, went to the general stores, the E-shop, the D-shop, etc. And I went down that subway probably 4 or 5 times a day, you know. It was quite, you know, virtually all the shops I had to go to were the actual side of the line. That the E-shop one side, you had the Gloucester line, and then you had the locomotive works. So and most of the chargemen were based around the local workshops. So I went backwards and forwards, day in, day out. It was always good on Fridays, because every alternate Friday I wrote out the coal tickets and sometimes wood tickets, because the men were allowed to get so much coal every fortnight. I think they paid something for it, but it was certainly a lot cheaper than what they would bought from the coal merchants. I had to write out these tickets. I had a book with all the names and addresses in, and I'll just write them out and just take these tickets. So that was the job probably most of Friday morning and most of Friday afternoon to take them round, you know. So that Friday job, they didn't really hardly ever see me, you know. I was happy, you know. They were happy because I got the work done what they wanted, so that was fine. I went down the gasworks. I said just now that in my childhood, you know, I knew the gasworks was there, but one of their depots was in the gasworks, so I had to go down there run about once a day, twice a day sometimes. It was very varied where I went each day, but it was, you know, it's all part of the fun. I went to the substations. The actual main substation was where the actual small exhibition hall is for steam. You can, if you look up at the roof, you can see it's got an industrial past. The feed was taken in from the Morden power station. Then from that power station, it then fed one feed across to the Cows and Wagon Works substation, and one on the east face of the A shop, and which also came under the E shop, you know, for the all the paperwork, which I kept taking backwards and forwards, day in, day out, but I was happy. I went in the general stores occasionally, which was at the end of the Gloucester subway, and I had to take bits of paper. You know, I didn't really always understand what it was about, but it wasn't my job to actually know what it was about. It just told where to take it, and occasionally bring things back. So yeah, that 12 month really went quite quick. It was quite I had quite good fun there. Right, now oh yeah, with the shop where, the actual shop office where I was working, the E-shop, there was a man there named Roy Simpkins, and about once a month he brought in a cake that he'd made, and it was a gâteau about that thick, you know, and I had a piece like everybody else, so it just meant while I was there that their pieces were a little bit smaller, because he still gave me the same size piece as the rest. So yeah, we all had a piece of cake. I was working with a boy in the D-shop office. E-shop and the D-shop office were actually the clerks, which was one office. E-shop one end, D-shop the other end. But then on the end of those offices, one was an office for the
for the e-shop foreman, and at the end of office for the actual carpenter shop foreman. And Pete Shepherd was there when I started. He showed me around for about 2 or 3 days, and then I was on my own then, which it didn't take long to pick up really, going through the same routes. But he was didn't have an apprenticeship. Well, when he left, he was a rivet hotting. Now I cannot imagine rivet hotting being a very inspiring job. You know, I felt a bit sorry for him. You know, I don't know what his plans were, but you know, that's what he was going to do. And I was glad that I didn't really have that in front of me. Yeah, just once I went over the carriage and wagon. That was to the substation. The man there was named Dennis Sexton. The man the attendant in the main substation, where Steve is now, was named Stan Fletcher. I've always forgotten what the name of the attendant was over in the A shop. I've often wondered, but I just wonder why I could remember 2 of them. I can't remember the 3rd one, you know. It doesn't really matter. Right. So by the time I had to leave to begin my apprenticeship, the end of 1962, I felt I had knew every corner of the works. Just how wrong I was, I shall tell you more about that later. Now, I think I will, I'll just talk about my apprenticeship, and then we'll stop for a break. During my time in the workshops, apprentices spent on one gang for 3 months. Then they moved on to next gang, because the boys, if there had been any there, moved on round, just like a big clock, really, you know. When we moved on, someone else could move into our place. Because of the job I'd had as an office boy, I knew exactly where I was going. When I was told which shop I was going to, you know, I actually knew where it was, you know. But most of the other boys didn't really know quite where they were, you know. They sort of did find out in the end, but I got there a lot quicker. I started in the art machine shop, the art shop, as it was known at that time. I was in nut scraggery. Now, it's the most badly lit, boring, soul-destroying, filthy and very smelly place I'd ever been in. The work was no better either. It was a bit of a shock. From the week before, I was sat in a nice clean office, walking around the works, enjoying myself. But then I was in this workshop. That I knew I had to start somewhere, but I wish it'd been somewhere else. My job was to face nuts off. We had a big bin of nuts, and I had a machine where I could just feed the nut onto a spindle, which was always going round. It didn't ever go round, so you put the nut on and it just ran onto the spindle. I turn a handle to face it off, turn the handle back, pull the nut off with a lever on the side, pick the next nut up, put it on, do it, turn it off. Each one took around about 10 seconds perhaps, you know. Some small ones, some big ones for two-handed ones. You can usually get through a whole day. The big ones, you might have 2 or 3 bins of them, but the little server ones, by the end of the day, there was hardly enough to see up the bottom of the bin, you know. Nuts in, day out, you know. But that's what it was. And I was very sort of pleased. I was only there for 3 months. Mind, I didn't know what I'd have to do after that. So, you know, I mean, at least I didn't know then. I've done it for 3 months, but it felt like 3 years, you know. It was very boring, but it did get me used to being in a workshop, get me used to using the machine, and I suppose, you know, by the end of the first week, I probably smelt as most of any other people there, you know, we all smelt the same then. For about the first two weeks, I took my overalls home for Mum to wash them. They virtually could stand up with a salt almost, all the grease and the oil. Mum, I think it took her all of them on a Monday morning to do my pair of overalls, you know. She was very pleased that when I found out after about 2 weeks that I could get them cleaned in work, you know. I took them into the stores on the Friday evening or Monday morning, and I could get a clean pair in turn, you know. Mum was so relieved, you know. I think she was happy then. I think she could see herself doing those for 5 years. Now, my apprenticeship was to learn fitting, turning and erecting. The fitting was basically bench work, filing and repairing various valves for the diesel engines and different things, doing all sorts of bench work really. That was quite interesting because each time I moved on, it was something different, you know. And I got to know quite a these valves to do them, you know, fairly quickly. I mean, some we had to take to pieces and put in new parts, just sometimes clean them. All sorts of valves for, you know, after diesel locomotives, and put it back together again, you know, which was quite good. I'm just going to, I'm just going to have a backtrack. So, sorry, one more thing about the nut scraggery. Reg Hancock's hat. The chargeman in the scraggery was a man named Reg Hancock. He used to sit in his box, looking round us, not say anything, but I think he wanted to make sure we were still there, you know. But one of the boys got a bit fed up with him. We came back one lunchtime, and he went to take his cap off of the door. He had two caps, one a going home cap and one a working cap. The working cap at lunchtime, he put that on the hook, and he went home with his home cap on. He came back, it was quite a ritual every day. We used to watch him, you know, and his cap wouldn't come off the door. Someone had put a big nail through it. I kept my head down, wouldn't I? I think we all kept our heads down. But one more thing I did as an apprentice, I mean, most apprentices play some sort of tricks. It's the usual thing that each gang had a certain place where they could just relax for their lunch and tea breaks, out of boxes and old sacks, whatever you could get, you know. And I realised there's one chap, when I come back from lunch, he was always asleep. And there was a lot of compressed air pipes in the factory, and some leaked. Well, I brought in a balloon. I stuck the balloon on the end of the air pipe and then walked away as fast as I could. I heard the bang when I was halfway down the shop. You know, I must have frightened him to death. But yeah, that was quite fun. That was. And anyway, yeah, the fitting involved in various sorts of bench work. Some just to actually learn how to use a file, because I hadn't really used used any metal tools before, you know, but it wasn't that hard to know what to do. It was more harder to do it. If you want to get something flat, you could see what you needed to do, but it takes a lot of patience to do it properly, you know. And I found it out in the end because I kept getting rejects. I realised I wouldn't spend enough time on it, you know. So in the end, I actually got it correct, but it took me a long time to sort of know really how I should be doing it. Turning, using all types of machines. I had to work in lathes, sometimes drills, different machines that doing things at the time. I wasn't really quite sure what piece I was working on, but for that 3 months I kept being moved around to different machines. So you know, I mean, it's a job to remember what you were doing on one particular one. But I can remember on the lathes, I had to turn a bolt, put a thread on the bolt, and the actual thread was a square thread. I had to do a square thread a certain size, and it wasn't a nut, but it's something it had to screw into that I could screw on the end to make sure it did actually fit. And that was a silver nut. That was rather than the black steel. This was one that was a bit more, had to be more precise. You know, yeah, that was interesting. Putting nuts onto a bolt. Yeah. I mean, some were done automatically, but I had to make the bolt except this big nut thing. You know, so yeah. The chargeman showed me a few what to do. After that, I was on my own. After a day or so, you know, I'd sort of got on okay with it, you know. I think one bolt got scrapped, but it was alright. I was working in the old G shop, the millwright shop, and a few weeks ago, I went down to the man I was working with. There had been a breakdown crane that had been brought in for repair, and they didn't know why, but it wasn't turning properly. It should be one that you could turn round, but the actual bearing, there seemed to be something wrong with the bearings. There was a bit of a gap down the side, so my chargeman and the foreman was there, and he asked me to actually just pop down there underneath and have a look. Well, I mean, there was a lot of grease and oil around, you know, but I was an apprentice, I just did what I was told. That's what I did. And I went down underneath. I couldn't quite see it because there wasn't room to bend down, but I could feel it. And what happened, the actual, it was a big crane base with a boss on the end, with a hole through for the actual spindle could actually, the actual crane could turn around this spindle, and this boss had broken off the crane base. So when the crane had been dismantled, they had this big base. It was about the diameter, about the length of these two tables, about that thick. It had to be very, very thick and quite heavy. Well, very heavy, because that's what held the crane stable. But the boss had broken off. So what the man on the machine was doing, I was really only just passing him tools. It was that time, that was way beyond my experience to do. But he had to bore out the outer base of the crane to an exact dimension. I think it was about plus or minus 2 thou. You know, they're very tight, and then the new boss that's going in had to be an interference fit, which, if you've ever worked in engine, you know what that is. That the piece going in is a bit bigger than the hole. you're only talking about a very fraction of an inch, but it means it's tight. It won't come out, because that's what had to hold it in. It being tight enough to act as one piece of metal. And he actually did this. It went in very slowly. He actually had machined this boss to the right diameter to go into the hole with just a slight interference fit. And he had a sort of a brace thing. He kept turning very slowly, forced this boss into the hole. In the end, they had a crane base with a hole through the centre, same as what they started with. And it was working, you know. So, and the last bit I thought, what do we do now if it won't go any farther? But it did, because it went right to the end, you know. That was interesting, and I found out when I was working with, he was actually one of my distant relations, you know, about 4 or 5 generations back. But it's the first time I actually knew about him. Now, with the erecting, that used to be with the steam locomotives. I did do some machining for some parts to go onto the steam locomotives, but by the time that I actually got down to the erecting shop, all was on diesel work. It was all on diesel work. We took down a lot of the valve gear. Took down both the gearboxes, engines, and everything had to come out. And some did require some extensive repair, but really there wasn't an awful lot. When you think of the size of the engine and all the equipment, there wasn't an awful lot we had to do on them, really. You know, a lot were in quite good condition. They just wanted a bit of cleaning. Various valves wanted cleaning, readjusting, but when we've took all this down, it all go to different workshops. When it come back, we reassembled it, and then we had to take it out for a test run. Well, I actually drove a D1000 class locomotive from Swindon workshops down to Badminton, but I was very, very, very well supervised. But it wasn't much to it, really. I think it's easier than driving a car. But of course, part of the skill being an engine driver, you've got to know the signals, you've got to know all the different signs along the railway, and it's not just to drive the train, to drive it safely. That's the point, you know. Which I wouldn't have been safe just to let go, but because there was these people behind me just telling me exactly what to do and when, we were fine, you know. I quite enjoyed that. Don't even know how a diesel engine works? In 4 simple words. It goes suck, squeeze, bang, blow. It's a 4-stroke engine. If you have the piston at the top, the crankshaft at the bottom, and the com rod, the com rod turns down and it pulls down the piston. That's when the actual fuel is sprayed in. As it goes up, squeezing it up, bang. That's the power stroke going down again. Then it moves it up again and it blows out the exhaust. So suck, squeeze, bang, blow. I've always remembered that from my apprenticeship, you know. So if someone asks you how does a diesel engine work, just say suck, squeeze, bang, blow. No problem. I thought you might like to know that. Yeah, there were tea breaks. We used to have a tea break, a quarter of an hour in the morning, the afternoon. In the morning, I went down to the canteen. It was just in time to get which at that time was the basement of the patron stores, to get us a steak kidney pie, take it back to where I was working, sit down and eat it. But when I got home lunchtime, I was still wanted some lunch. I was still felt hungry. I think it's all the exertion I was getting. But yeah, those steak knee pies were very nice too. Right, at the end of my apprenticeship, in December 1967, I stayed on the gang I had been with since October 67, after my last move. I was working with a man named Fred Lamb. I didn't really know much about him. I thought he was a Mexican, he wasn't English. I thought he was Mexican, and I didn't ask him, but we got on very well together, you know, that we really worked as a team. And I felt by that time much more as an engineer than what I did when I started my apprenticeship 5 years ago. You know, I understood also a bit more about the diesel locomotive because I could see what the valves were doing, where they were going and what they were doing. And before, I just had them on the bench, whatever I was doing to it, and just passed it on down. I didn't really think about my future. I stayed on the gang after my time was up as an apprentice. At that time, you weren't compelled to leave, but I didn't really have a plan B for what I was going to do then. And I just carried on, you know, for a few months. But in April, 68, Fred asked me to get some bolts from the stores. So I went to the stores, but on the way I did something I don't think I've not done more than half a dozen times in my life. I stopped to read a notice board, and I saw there they wanted staff in the drawing office. I didn't know what it was about, but it was the fact that the drawing office always sort of made me interested. So I went up to the clerk's office up the steps. All the offices, you had the clerks from it on top. Underneath was the stores for each shop, and they just stocked virtually everything that each shop needed. I went and asked for the chief clerk because by then, after having worked in the e-shop, I actually knew who I should speak to. And I told the chief clerk that I was interested in that post in the drawing office. So he arranged an appointment for me to go up, I think, next day, I think. And I went up to this office, red carpet on the floor. I not thought to change out my overalls and my boots. I just went in. They looked a bit, but they agreed to take me on, and he said he would start Monday morning. So that was the end of my shop floor experience. I still wonder how things would have worked out if I just stayed. If I was still there in 1986, I would have probably had to have left then. But as it was, that was the best move I ever made, you know. So I was quite interested to know what the work was. Right. I didn't remind the boys I was working with that during my apprenticeship 5 years, I took the chance one day off a week. I went up to the Swindon College, and I also sometimes I went to night school. Some years I went to night school, but they were a bit shocked when I went back down on the shop floor and told them I was leaving. I don't think I'd ever talked about leaving, and I think they were a bit envious. But I didn't remind them that I've been going on day release 1 day a week, and they chose not to. So I didn't think I would, because that wouldn't really been fair, you know. But I said, well, I thought it was time for a change, so that's what I was doing. So I think can we break off a little bit for about quarter hour, 20 minutes, and then we'll go on. Yeah. Right. The last session I was just talking about my apprenticeship, and I'd applied for a job in the drawing office. This was the Swindon plant drawing office. They're responsible for all the services and maintenance of the buildings, machinery, workshops, gas, water, hydraulic supply, drainage and sewerage. I was working with a lot of quite well-educated people. I think most of them were either chartered or incorporated. It was the electrical engineer, electronics engineer, lighting, mechanical engineers, lifting engineers, gas engineers, surveyors. But I was accepted, as in the e-shop, I was in quite a lowly position, but I was accepted as part of the staff. I spent most of the time producing drawings, maps, plans and alterations for workshops and etc. Occasionally I went to different places around the works, dropping dies down manholes with Ken Brown, the water chap, and to find out if there was a problem with the water supplies. Usually they want to find out where the water was actually going to, so dropping down different manholes and drop the dye down, they could see where it come out. This was another job where I had quite a lot of time to explore the works, and I did find out a few places that I'd not known about before. One was the service subway. Now the central hydraulic station, known as the Hooter House, in the basement there's, if you go down some little steps, at least it were, you open a door and you step into a circular arch. That's the service subway, and there was one branch that went across to the L2. That's the tender shop. Well, when you come up, there was a little wooden shed. Best way to describe it, a little bit of a shed above the entrance from this, or exit from this subway. And we went in there a few times. We just opened the door and come out, and shut the door and locked it. People were looking, where did they come from? I mean, they didn't really know what this was. There's nothing on it to actually say this is access to the works service subway. It's a circular arch, circular brick arch, and about 6 foot diameter, I suppose. It's enough to walk through. Might be 7 feet probably. And it was used for services. I think electric cables. I don't know. I don't think it had the hydraulics. I think it might. I remember electric cables. I don't really remember anything else, but I think it did have more than that. But this subway one branch went under the Gloucester line and came up on the other side of the Gloucester line. And again, there was one of these little shed things where you just walked out of it or go into it. So they might wonder when are they coming back? Well, they could wait all day, but we did because we were next somewhere else. And it went down to the A shop. One branch went down to the A shop. And again, there's one of these little sheds. And we went down there one day and just come out. And people look around and where you come from? You know, we just looked, it says in morning or afternoon, and just went back to the office, you know. I think we went a few times to look for any leaks or something. I don't really know why, because it wasn't my actual job. It was Ken Brown's job. I just went with him because he just thought I would be interested, which I was. I was very interested, you know. It's just something that I didn't know about before. So that was quite interesting, and that is shown on the 1250 plan. There used to be a plan of the works, what's called the 1250, because the outer scale was 1 to 1250. And when I was in the office, in that drawing office, I used these plans, 1250 plans, on a daily basis. I always wish I got one printed and just brought it home, just for interest, you know. But all the details of the works were there. Every building, everything that had been made or built was on this plan. It showed the Yeah, I think it showed the service subway. I'm not quite sure whether it did or not, but it did show the subways, subways ending square, and the subway across to the other side of the Gloucester line. And it was good map actually. I went with Jack Hards, who was he was the electrical engineer. He was responsible for all the substations. But going down the subway to Emblem Square, there used to be some doors in the side where he unlocked and went in, and there was a small substation in there. Well, not substation really, much smaller scale, sort of. They had a different name for it, but it was something that I didn't know about, and you know, it was quite interesting. So I did learn quite a lot in that office, but because the work was very often were way above my level, you know, they did give me some work to do, some drawings, etc. And I made one mistake. I was asked to do a layout drawing, then want to put it in a new machine, and they said, you know, you might want to have a look at where the access is where connect up with electricity, and I talked to it to actually move a electrical junction box, and they said you can't do that because you can't move that. That's all cabled in. You know, you connect to it, but you can't move it, which is something that's one thing I learned there. I felt a bit daft really, but still, that didn't really matter, you know, because someone else would actually have seen what I'd said if it hadn't been spotted. There's nothing more I can really say about that because a lot of it was fairly mundane stuff. You know, I was there for 4 years, and then I was made redundant, and I did wonder what I would do then. But I did apply for a job in the actual crane section in Swindon, but they decided they could do without my services, so I didn't get that. But then I was told if I was prepared to travel to London, there was a job for me in the actual bridge office in London. I said, yes, I'm prepared to travel. So I didn't really know what the job was about, but when I got there, I was told a little bit more about it. It was the actual bridge assessment office. This is something that I found quite difficult to know how to actually present this. So what I'm going to do is, I've got a note here, keep it simple, no jargon. Just some salient points about bridges in general. And bridge assessment is exactly opposite to bridge design. If I told you I was a bridge design engineer, you would have an idea what I would do. I would design girders, beams, perhaps substructures, butts, etc. for a certain load. But a bridge assessment engineer, it's very different. You have to work with what you've got, and often old bridges needing care and attention. Sometimes very limited drawings or no drawings at all, which in some cases was the case. Bridge assessment is done to really ensure that the bridge is safe for the load that it has to carry, whether it's a road bridge or a rail bridge, footbridge, etc. Bridge assessment is to find the actual safe carrying load. Now, as there are bridge design codes, there's also bridge assessment codes, which is what we used. A few points generally. A bridge is only as strong as the weakest member. A bridge in good condition still be weak, and a bridge in poor condition could still be strong. It is partly dependent on the design loading that was used when it was built, but very often this is not available for all bridges. One design loading was on drawings. Now it has a boiler trolley. Now what they mean by boiler trolley, to actually move the boilers, but what we needed to know, the weights on the axles of this trolley and how far apart the axles were, which we didn't ever find out. No one could tell us how a boiler trolley was actually made up. It's the wheels that provides the loads on the bridge, and that's what you need to take into account when you're talking about loading. To know you got, say, a 40-ton boiler trolley, which is what it was, you know, you can't just put 40 tons on that without knowing where to put it. All types of constructions are dealt with: masonry, concrete, timber, brick, whatever comes up, you know, we have to deal with it. And to start off with, we do a desk study using existing records, and very often there are past calculations that's been done on this bridge. A site visit to determine condition and obtain information for the calculations. Often there's a lot of dimensions that you need to do the calculations, not just how the bridge is built, but how far away the actual track is from the girders, etc. Produce assessment calculations, then make recommendations. That's generally the way we work through an assessment. The recommendations may include repairs, it may be weak, so it may need strengthening, weight, axle or speed restrictions, a bridge test, or a reconstruction. And I found that it was quite interesting when you get a bridge to start with to know how it's going to turn out, because you can't tell until you've done the calculations. You can't do the calculation until you know its condition, because if a girder is very corroded, you need to know what's left. It's no good saying, oh, it's just badly corroded. You have to know what material you've got that's actually going to take load. So that's the idea of a site visit. We're very lucky if we have drawings of the bridge. Some of the bridges what I've worked on, we had some old drawings around about 1900s, that sort of period. They weren't all that precise, always precise on detail. So you have to do it often. You have to do a site visit to actually examine for condition, but also to provide enough information that you can do a calculation. Because if you know a bridge is in poor condition, you want to calculate it. You want to know how much of the girder is left. If the plate is badly corroded, you've probably lost a lot of section. And yeah, you have to accept what you got. You can't choose to what you're going to do. You've got to do what's needed to do. I went down to one bridge with one of my mates that was on the section. He'd actually joined us about 3 weeks ago. I told him we got a rail bridge it was a road bridge. It was a road bridge in Wales, and so we had the track run underneath. Now, very often in the olden days, when you had steam trains, they used to put a plate up above the tracks underneath the bridge to stop all the smoke getting up and doing damage to the bridge. But actually, putting up that smoke plate did more damage than leaving it down, because it allowed corrosion to occur where you couldn't see it. And this was very, very badly corroded, this bridge we were looking at. But you still have to get a section to work with to know what you're going to calculate. You have to assume if it's lost, if you lost metal, you haven't got it. But very often, if it's very flaky on the edges, you can't include that because that's got no strength. You got to bash it about a lot to get down to a real metal. And when you finished it, often you haven't got much left. Which I've got two examples here. Oh. One at Whitchurch. This is a model of the Whitchurch Bridge. This was the main girders. It would have flange plates across the bottom and across the top, and there's a lot of bars to make it strong. But it'd been hauled by a road vehicle. It was it had a low loader. There was a low loader. On the back of this loader, he had some sort of a crane or something, and the actual jib as a crane went through the bridge, which wasn't very good. And this had been badly damaged. I can't stand too far because of the lead. This side had been badly damaged. The bottom plates had been pushed upwards. So this was bent up, this was holed, and the abutments were virtually two parts. There was I'll show you some photographs. I'll put some books out afterwards if you want to have a quick look. It's up to you. But the abutments, there was a crack down each abutment, and when the tractor went over, you could feel the two moving one against the other. So it was obvious it didn't have very much strength. In fact, it didn't have very much strength before we went down. I looked at the calculations, it was right down to the bottom of the scale. So we've said we'll have to do a site visit to find out what is actually going on. These here, these cardboard, this is representing jack arches. There would have been this is cross girders. There would be jack arches going from one cross girder to the next. That is to support. I brought some lumps of concrete with me. That's to support the concrete would go on top of there, and it'll go right up to the end. That's all level, and then you put the ballast on. Put the ballast on the top, which has got all covered in concrete. Put the ballast on top, then you've got the track on top of that. Now, you have parapet plates along the side, but this is the main structural members. The main girders, cross girders. There was a lot more cross girders, but I couldn't really do it on that scale, making it too big. This carried one line, and there's one side by side to actually with the other line. Now, this was quite a lot of work. I took just the one with Whitchurch. I took the other chap with me because it was obvious I wasn't going to get all the work done in a day, which we wanted to do. So that's the reason why both of us went down. I put some little tabs on. If anyone cares to have a look, you're quite welcome to. This bridge was reconstructed because there was no option, it was beyond repair. What I did do when I come back, and once I've done the calculations, I could see, it was going to be reconstructed, but we had to do something to make it safe. So I had a quick word with my boss and told him I was going to put a restriction on the line of 20 miles an hour, but all goods trains would be diverted, would have to be diverted because of the weight of the locomotives. So straight away that went on the next day. So it was made safe from that point of view. It was sufficient at that time for lighter traffic, but that was still kept under a review. I also asked for it to be put on a weekly inspection from the district staff to let me know if there's anything happening that we ought to know about, any further deterioration that is visible that we ought to know about. That was a very interesting bridge, but it almost didn't even come to a start because I booked the visit and asked for an extension letter, but they didn't actually provide a ladder. They didn't realise they had to provide a ladder. This was again from the district office. Something somewhere had gone a little bit haywire, so we didn't have a ladder. But I went round to Brandon Tools, I think it was, and said, "Do you hire extension ladders?" I said yes, but I said I want one now, and this is who you charge it to. And I spoke to my boss at work and said, you're going to have to pay to hire a ladder, which he did. And so at least we had a ladder to do it. Else we couldn't have done very much. I know you can't see it from there, but I was going to show the abutments, but yeah, there we are. I've put one of these notes on there. You had a crack down there, all around there. It was all cracked all over. Both abutments were in pieces. So there was no chance that it would not be reconstructed. And it was actually done quite quick, actually. You know, the outer design went through, and it was done about 9 months later, I think. They had to put in the new bridge. So because it was quite an important line. It's a line near Shrewsbury. It was quite an important line. So I'll put that on there, and if you want to have a browse, feel free to do so, but don't feel compelled to, you know. But the other one, this is a bridge which I did actually did by myself. This is Uppington Bridge. This is Bridge at Uppington, just between Swindon and Didcot. It's a very big truss girder bridge. You got lots of bars going across all the way across, and to do that, longhand would have taken, months. I spent from the start to finish on this job. I was on it about 3 months, I think. So I went to the inspection. I had to do it in stages because I could get to the section of where there's no track now. I think this is where the actual turner was the actual Farringdon branch, why it's such a long bridge. It was about 100 feet long, I think, about 100 feet. So I could examine that half of the bridge, quite easily. But to do this half, we had to get an occupation and do it during the night. I don't like working at night, but sometimes you can't avoid it. We had plenty of lighting. It was just like it was cold. It's one of those things. I used a program towards super stress to actually calculate the strength of this bridge, because if we'd done it longhand, it would take me months to do it. And we really wanted it out quickly because, again, there was one point where it was in very poor condition, and I did find out that about halfway across the bridge there was a section that had it almost corroded away, and that was what actually put the restriction on the rest of the bridge. Because I said just now, a bridge is only as strong as its weakest member. So this was not capable to actually carry the full loading. The railway's liability for this was a 24-ton vehicle, because that was their liability. Well, when the Department of Transport brought out new standards, it was agreed that if they wanted a bridge up above our liability, the local authority would have to actually pay for it. But this was reconstructed, and I think it's still down about a 7.5-ton vehicle. But it was quite interesting. I mean, doing the calculation, I had this program super stress, and I started off by putting the actual coordinates of all the joints, how far. You usually start at the bottom left-hand corner, and then you put for that joint's say 4 foot 5 sort of thing. Next one's about 10 feet. So in the end, you've got a lot of little dots all around the screen, and you can then say number 1 is from say number 1 to number 4. So that would go up there, and if you go through that, do it in some sort of a pattern. I usually did it along the bottom, then the uprights, verticals, uprights, verticals, uprights, verticals, along that, and then along the top. But don't matter which way you do it, that you can get a picture of that bridge on the screen. And then putting in more information, you can put on the loading, and it then produces a calculation that will tell you what the loading is in each member, which is what I wanted to know. That took me, I would think about 6 weeks to do that, just that part of the job. But yeah, if I'd done it longhand, it took me, well, lot more like 6 months. That was quite good. It had been tested. There was a material test, and they thought it was a steel bridge, but it was early steel, which is not very good. Early steel, in some cases, was worse than wrought iron. Wrought iron is weaker than steel, but because they don't get so much corrosion in wrought iron as you do steel, sometimes the wrought iron was preferable, but this was steel, and it was very poor condition. So this was also reconstructed, and it was took me quite a long time. If I show you the history of the bridge, or since 1898, is that page there. That both of those 2 pages, right up until 1995. That's all the things that were involved in that bridge. So this is the desk study that I did before I went down. Before I went to Surrey, I found all that information, so I could say that get a very good idea of what happened in the past, which is sometimes quite useful, you know, because sometimes things are done, you don't understand why it was done, but if you can understand why it's done, then you can then decide whether you can use that or whether it should have been done, you know, if it's causing any problems. So both of those 2 bridges, that one I examined with somebody else. This one I did by myself, and then I did all the reports and calculations. But bridge assessment is always different for different bridges, for different bridge. There's always something different. If you were designing, you could design 10 bridges to the same design, and you'd end up with 10 bridges doing the same job, looking the same. But with assessment, virtually everyone, there's something about that bridge that is different to the other bridges, whether it's in design or the way it's loaded or whatever. And I did find that job quite interesting. I was on that for just about 35 years. So by the end of it, I'd learned quite a lot about bridges. And I was quite pleased I went up there, you know. I do wonder what would have happened if I'd not gone up to the shop office and asked for that job in the drum office in Swindon, because if I'd not got that job, I wouldn't have had a chance to get the office in London, which in 1986, I think, that we moved down to Swindon. So it was quite good. Being in Swindon then, that suited me fine, you know. I mean, it was right on the doorstep. I didn't mind going up and down to London. It was a bit boring in the winter because it was all dark, but in the summer you could see what was going on, you know. And it was amazing that over those 13 years, seeing what changes took place, you know, where started there had been fields. By the time I finished, it was a big industrial estates, you know. Not that they're good or bad, but you could see what had been changed. And I didn't. Some did that. You tend to do a bit of work on the train. I didn't do that. I had a read. I thought I wanted to have a break. We were working on it all day. I didn't really want to sort of work on it on the way home as well, you know. There was one time when the road went on strike, and then we had to work from home. And I found it very difficult to know what to bring home to do, because invariably there was something I'd forgotten or I didn't realise that I would need at the time, and so I had to do something else, and I didn't really didn't mind the travelling, you know. Right, now I think that's the end of the talk. So I'll put these books there. If you want to have a look, you can do. Have a look at them, brave. But if you don't want to, then that's fine, you know. There's this. I produced this about 12 months before I left work. My boss asked me if I could write a manual for active training for bridge assessment, and this is all what I come up with. So again, I leave it on the table. If you want to know how to assess a bridge, you just read that front to back, then you'll be all right. Okay. Right, thank you much. Oh, I'll tell you what, I have got one claim to fame. In 1970s, we had to do some tests on the Royal Albert Bridge, not on the tubes, but on the deck members. So it actually took the train loaded. And at that point, it's not much different than any other bridge. That we were doing some testing on the bridge, and because the line speed was 20 miles an hour, we've been asked if we could allow speeds greater than 10 miles, greater than 20 miles an hour. And we said, in the end, we said no, because at the moment that bridge is okay, but it's now quite old, and you can't really take any risk with it. In time, the speed might come down to 10, which would be a little bit disturbing, but because that will almost close the railway line to Cornwall. But after we finished it, it was early in the morning, perhaps. It was light. You could see not early, about 9 o'clock, I think. I actually went up a ladder at the end of the bridge and walked across to the top of the tubes, and you get a beautiful view up there from Denton Cornwall. It was quite safe. There was a handrail. I mean, you won't be able to do it now. You have to be all chained up and all sorts of things, you know. But I kept my hand on the handrail. There was nothing
that side, if you go far enough, it tend to go away from you, you know. But just walking along, it is a walk plate. Do you know walk plates sometimes they're sort of raised portions, aren't they? So that it stops you sort of helps stop slipping. And I just walked along, just admiring the view, you know. It was fine, you know, it was quite good. Anyway, thank you. Okay. Hello.
Were you ever called to the bridge strikes in Swindon? Thinking of the White House?
Yeah. Well, the answer to that is no, because that is, in the first instance, that is the actual responsibility of the office, in our case, from Reading. There's the bridge section at Reading, that they deal with the day-to-day work and day-to-day maintenance and everything. If it had been damaged and there was a question about safety, then we would be involved. But because that bridge is built up of a longitudinal steel troughing, it's a box section, not like that. And the track is quite a long way from the face. So whatever hits that edge girder, it's not going to move the track. One of my mates, he actually did a calculation. He said, well, I reckon, he said, if you got a tank about 400 tons and just went straight at it, then you might actually do a bit of damage. But he said, yeah, I mean, I think the actual weight of the bridge is about 700 tons. You know, if you take all the ballast and everything, it'd be a job to do much damage to it. It's half-inch steel plates all joined together. So not really. I have been to some bridges that were bridge bashed. I went at one in South Wales. The bridge was on a hill. It was quite a steep hill too. So the height of the bridge at one side was a lot less than the other side. And this some sort of a crane. I think it was a crane on the back of a low loader. That's right, a crane on the back of a low loader. You could see he had plenty of room to go through, so he just put his foot down. Of course, halfway through, he actually couldn't get no farther. He got stuck. He got jammed under the bridge. I went down. Well, I was asked to go down to see what the damage was. The actual bridge engineer went down to see whether they could put the track on just on one side, which they did, because there was just one side that had been damaged. The other side wasn't affected. So that line was closed while they could actually get this thing out and make sure it was safe underneath. And then, because the outer track got skewed a bit, which didn't help. But yeah, quite a few bridge strikes that I've been to. And it's all because they don't take a notice of the actual signage. You know, if a bridge is signed at 14 feet, the actual headroom would be about 14'6". There's always a little bit of extra, but you're not supposed to go anything more above 14 foot under that bridge, because that's what it states, 14 feet. That extra is just to stop it being damaged. But if you start going through at 40 foot, something 40 foot high, then you're going to hit them. Yeah, you'll hit something. So, yeah. Any more questions? Okay. Well, I can take this off now, can I? Yeah.